I don't even know what I'm looking for.
This game is called Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, and yeah, it's supposed to make you absolutely blast.
Motherfucker, let's go! Oh god, oh god.
That stuff. Just like that, but slower. Much slower. And it should take a lot of investment and time. And then you have to schedule it to play in person. And you'll need a lot of physical space. And it might be bad. Giant robots controlled by a pilot are cool. And in this video, I'm going to talk about 6 tabletop games that feature them that I think are cool. Why do people like giant robot content? Good question. Well, this video by The Bellman argues that a giant pilotable robot, which I will refer to in this video as a mech, represents power fantasy, pure and simple. They're shaped like us because they're representational as a way to be powerful. A giant robot has fingers to pull a trigger, which directly connects a pilot with this act of violence. I would agree, but I would more disagree. I would argue that by making them in our own image, we're also giving mechs the same vulnerabilities as a human. Mobile suits in Gundam suffer physical harm and trauma in the same way that pilots do. The Gundam can therefore become a symbol of existential dread for Amuro Ray. The more power you have, the more in tune you are with your mobile suit, the less you have of yourself. A miniatures agnostic wargame is a game where the rules are set, but not the models you use. In the old days, all wargames were miniature agnostic. Historical games, by their very nature, don't really care what manufacturer you use when you're trying to represent a samurai or a doughboy. Games like Chainmail by Gary Gygax simply require that you use figures that feel appropriate to the medieval and/or fantasy world. Arsenal is one such game. There are many such games I'll talk about today, but Arsenal is the first one I'm talking about. Its touchstones are gritty sci-fi like Titanfall, Killzone, The Expanse, Avatar, Aliens, and so on, but especially Titanfall. Titanfall is good, but they don't make Titanfall games anymore. This fills the gap. Actually, let's cut to my time at Adepticon, where Jordan himself had the chance to talk about Arsenal. Tell me a little bit about your game, because I am not familiar with this at all, but I see some mechs and I see some cool guys, and my eyes are dilated.
Mechs, cool guys, dilated eyes.
Yeah, whole game.
We got tries, we got buys, we got mechs in your eyes.
Hell yeah.
With this game, Arsenal, this is small British combat with big honking mechs.
Cool.
Your fire team consists of 1 mech and 5 infantry, and then you have another 5 that are traveling high orbit waiting to be deployed.
Wow.
As needed. Your mech and your infantry are pretty flexible during combat. Your mech has 2 combat protocols, and that's basically a physical stats card.
Okay,
that changes out your weapon, your equipment, your subsystems. Your infantry work in the same way, where like this hacker character, they can hack a mech in line of sight, and if they successfully complete a hacking test, they can slow down the next movement or disable one of their subsystems.
Cool.
But if you don't want this guy in line of sight, because you know, infantry tend to die really easily. He's out of line of sight of the mech. He's going to deploy the shield wall that allows then maybe I get my combat engineer next turn to run through and not die.
Jordan, did you design this game?
I did. I designed this game. These are all my sculpts too.
You sculpted these too?
Yeah, outside of Electi, I run the Skullforge Studios Patreon.
Cool, I've seen that. That's awesome.
Yeah, wonderful.
Terrific.
So as you're, let's say we got these 2 guys here, they die because that gun, it may be a small gun for a mech, it's a big bullet for a person.
Yeah.
In the Ingress phase, every round, you can deploy your additional reserves, and they drop in Helldiver style.
The 5 guys you mentioned that are ready to go.
Exactly.
I like it, okay.
So now this mech is worrying about this mech, but this mech's got to worry about now your reinforcements.
Very cool.
So the game state is always changing. You may want to focus on one objective, but you will always lose. You have to spread yourself thin, but you got to remember that your mech is super powerful on the battlefield. And so you may be spread thin, but you got a lot of firepower.
There's a lot of cool mech games out there. We got your BattleTech, you know, etc. This one, let's just be real, this one seems to be inspired by Titanfall, right?
It's very much inspired by Titanfall.
Good.
Yeah.
Finally.
There's the games we play, and I think everyone has that itch in their head that's like, well, what if I could kind of shrink it down a bit and bring it to the tabletop? And so I think with Arsenal, we have the chance to do that. A lot of people love Titanfall,
Yeah.
myself included, and I think it's time that we play something like this.
I agree. Is Arsenal available now?
It'll be available in August, the next issue of Blaster magazine.
Fantastic, fantastic. Do you now all these sculpts, right? Obviously, these are 3D prints. Do you guys like? Did you design these? You sculpted these?
Yes.
Do you guys think they'll be selling kits, or is this just like going to be old style? You can print it as you wish.
We are selling these as STL kits along with issue 7 at the Electro Studio website.
Cool.
And then on my Patreon, after release, I'll also have a fire team available every other month. A full mech with arms, both leg poses, along with all the imagery you need for that fire team. Because I love just theming things differently. Maybe one month we'll have a quad walker mech that like you can change out the top turn on it. You know,
Cool, I love that.
Things really out there and really different.
Can't wait for August, man. This sounds so cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Arsenal is out now. You can get it from Electi Studios. While it might be miniatures agnostic, that doesn't mean there aren't minis for you to use. If you have a printer or access to one, Skullforge is going to be pumping out fire teams and models for use in the game for the next few months. I've had the chance to check it out now, and I think it's neat. Having a small pool of infantry that can die and respawn is unique. You basically only ever have 5 troopers on the ground at a time, with more arriving as you lose them. It's on a 3x3 board, it uses normal dice, alternating activations, and one huge mech in addition to your disposable grunts and specialists. The STLs they're selling are exquisite if you're just looking for some cool toys to print. I'm printing out at least 2 mercenary companies, one based on Trauma Team from Cyberpunk, and the other using the gritty Skullforge models. I also had the chance to talk about this with Defective Dice. Obviously, he's only selling STLs. He's not selling you logistics, but they looked really cool, and his paint jobs were pretty cool. And from at least what he said, the game sounds like it's a real game, like it's a really thought-out game. Blaster Magazine, every couple of months, it seems, 6 to 7 months, they're putting out a new war game, miniatures agnostic. Some of them, they seem to be selling components for. For example, I mentioned you can buy bits specifically for Hobgoblin. Same thing, it's like, use whatever spaceships you want, but you can also buy the STLs for our spaceships. And we've got custom, like, stands for them. Seems super, super cool.
Yeah, I think you said that you keeps a unit in reserve so that if you take a certain amount of casualties, then you can kind of like deploy them in on the other side to try to like get a flank in. It sounds really cool. I mean, you know, it reminds me of Titanfall in that sense because things are very dynamic and like you can drop stuff in. Like that sounds like a really cool idea. I'd love to play a game like that.
You can expect a more in-depth review and discussion of the setting after I've had the chance to play a couple more games. But if it interests you, there are links, like with all these games, in the description below. Gamma Wolves. I haven't played it. I built some mechs for it. I own the rulebook. I read it, and I think it's all right. The mechs are slow and clunky. The rules are pretty fun to read. The campaign system seems interesting and entertaining. The attitude of kit-patching models together to make American-style mecha is neat. The art is good. That's all cool. It's like Gaslands for robots, I guess. And the rules don't blow me away. It's fun to read, and the fan community has made some very nice handouts and reference cards and aids, and I don't think I'm going to play Gamma Wolves. I could be convinced, maybe I'll do a short video on the lore, but I'm a snob. I roll around in the dirt with the worms, and yet I judge the toads who feast on the vermin for being down here with me. Not all mech content is amazing. Gamma Wolves seems decent, and I don't need to spend time playing games that only I think are decent. Unless someone asks me to play. Here's a cool link to a playthrough that I liked, and I don't know, maybe I'll have to play it at least once just to get it out of my system. Anyway, Steel Rift is a game by Death Ray Designs, and it is also written by Ash Barker, just like Gamma Wolves. It's a 6mm game with a delightful industrial aesthetic. It's got some BattleTech energy. It's got the same scale, after all, with your tiny mechs towering over similarly tiny buildings. It's also got the similar vibe where customizing your teensy tiny little guys with all the best gear and guns is hugely satisfying. Death Ray Designs sells a huge variety of options and minis and bits and kits with a nice look to them that reminds me of old Armored Core, like PlayStation 1 and 2 graphics, and obviously it's got like a lot of BattleTech looks. I don't know. Something about these makes me feel like they would be right at home on a PC RTS in 2002. It is also primarily miniatures agnostic, so you can use your BattleTech models or other tiny 6mm minis. The setting is an Earth scorched by extreme solar storms, where humanoid endoskeletal vehicles, or heavies, are used to do warfare and scavenge in the dangerous zones of Earth's northern hemisphere. Compared to a similarly scaled game like BattleTech, this one is definitely faster. You use only a couple mechs, and they're pretty detailed. They're slow, sturdy, lumbering. They've got the American Mecha thing going on, where they're, tank-like. It's got alternating activations, got some nice, understandable rules with graphic design that I quite enjoyed. I admit this one I only got a demo in, but it seemed cool. So if this sounds like your kind of game, check it out. Links are in the description, as they always are. Mobile Arms Endless Destiny is another speedy skirmish game that bills itself as featuring quick and accessible mecha mayhem. Obviously, it's indebted to anime that made it to America in the 90s and 2000s. While I naturally recoil at such weaponized nostalgia, I'm also drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. It speaks my language. It draws me in. But, not enough to buy the game. I admit, I think it looks cool. I haven't played it. But my fellow YouTuber, Old Ones with Dice, did play it, and he was nice enough to share a minute of his thoughts on the game and why it's good.
Hey, it's Grover with Old Ones with Dice. Jet asked me to talk about this. This is Mobile Arms Endless Destiny from Blackside Studios, written by Corey Sullivan. It is a 28mm mecha skirmish game. What really caught my eye when I saw this come up on pre-order a few months ago were the mechs, the frames themselves. I happen to have one here on my desk. I really like the way they're modeled. What's really interesting is they have a designed hardpoint system on the miniatures themselves that allow you to put magnets inside, magnets in the weapon, and you can swap them out. In order to represent that, you actually have a card system that you have laid out in front of you that will keep track of whether that weapon has fired and has overheated. Once it's overheated, it's done for the turn. It has a really unique alternating activation system. It's your basic you go, I go, but you don't have to do all of your actions at once. So you can kind of do one action, alternate to the other player, then activate that same model, do something again. And every time you activate, you build up heat. So it adds a lot of tactical choices for you as you're playing the game. It uses surge dice. So you have dice that are unique. So hits, heat, and surge results. The surge results, every time you fire, they're going to be giving you an option for extra damage, extra effects, and sometimes extra movement. So you get some really interesting cinematic moments where it shoots at a target and it kind of darts to the side and gets a better angle at the target. Something you don't see in a lot of games. It is really a lot of fun. So if you're looking for kind of a mecha-based miniatures game, something on a small scale that's small, brutal, and fast, this might be the way to go.
I think that Mobile Arms Endless Destiny is neat. I would say check out his channel because we could use more small YouTubers who cover weird games like the ones I'm talking about today. Old Ones with Dice even has a very nicely put together long play featuring a single sortie of Mobile Arms, which is how I learned about this game in the first place. Thanks, Mike. And yeah, I got to chat with the creators of BLKOUT. Let's just play that footage.
I read one blurb. I was super interested in BLKOUT. So, what makes it special to you? Tell me about it.
Yeah, man, it's going to be fast, easy to get into, and kind of no BS rules. It's going to be using a D10-based system, as easy as possible to jump into and learn, even at a convention setting like this, and get everybody involved in playing the game and learning to play the game to experience more.
What's the target audience? What's the vibe of BLKOUT?
Yeah, the vibe's going to be anywhere from entry-level gamers to players that want an alternative to like a primary game. Right?
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. What were your, two more questions. What were your three biggest touchstones, like your biggest inspirations making BLKOUT? The models, incredible. You showed me a guy with a big triangular helmet. I'm in love. So yeah, what were your main inspirations?
Yeah, watching District 9 when I was like 12, playing Titanfall with all my homies in college after getting out some military stuff. And of course, just the realism that's inspired by actual military design and kind of like usage design, right? Realism.
That's so cool. That's so cool. BLKOUT is available now. We've got a lot of ways to get into it. What's your favorite? What way do you recommend? Is there a specific starter? Should people download the rules first? Are they available online?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't believe in really half-assing things, especially if you're going to share the hobby with somebody. Find a friend, agree that you like the models, split the starter box online. You get some not Russians, Manticore, and some South African mercenaries called Harlow. Rules come with it. Get right in the game, paint them up, have a great experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Blackout is not a mech game, but it's got some sick-looking mechs in it. I've played a few games of it, and I think it's neat, I think it's solid, I think it's got its own thing going. It is much like Arsenal in some ways. It has a gritty sci-fi look. It is not models agnostic. They sell their own line of very nice resin miniatures. There are a number of factions to choose from, all of which are quite handsome. The game itself uses D10s and has fairly minimal list building, but I think it's interesting. You choose a faction and build your force based on blocks of preset fire teams of units. A full game is only 2 or 3 fire teams, and each choice only has a few options. This is actually kind of neat. Like, you might take 2 assault teams, or 1 assault team and 1 sniper team. You're selecting from a menu of already customized operators rather than kitting out each guy individually. I like this, and I would like to see more games try it out. The setting is the first and last colony world, Able, in an era of socio-political splintering. It feels quite a bit realistic in some aspects, especially when you compare it to some of the other games we've looked at. Units are desperate to stay in cover. They can lean out to shoot, complete with mechanics to support that leaning out while taking cover. Fairly realistic tactics will apply here. If you want to slice the pie, that's a good idea. You'll want to have interlocking fields of fire. You want to have teams cover each other as they rabbit from space to space between cover and buildings. It's definitely more full-spectrum warrior than it is Call of Duty. Some people have described it as a lightweight version of Infinity, although I think that's a bit reductive. It certainly has a similar energy. Gunfights are extremely lethal, almost unfair in a way that feels like an interesting commentary on ultra-modern conflict. There is kind of a reaction system, but it's nowhere near as in-depth as Infinity's arrows. My time with it is brief. I got a demo, and I got a couple of games at home, but it is neat. The rules are solid. The dusters, those being the giant robots, are only used in special scenarios. You can't take them unless you both agree that this is a duster sort of mission. But thankfully, they don't add a bunch of complexity or other rules. Defective Dice and I also had the chance to discuss Blackout, by the way.
So Blackout, apparently this company...
Enemy Spotted Studios. They made Kill Wager, I think.
Kill Wager, there you go. So they did Kill Wager, and Blackout is a new game that they just released that is in the same universe. Apparently there is some crossover in terms of the factions that are available, and I don't think it's directly compatible, but it's super easy to proxy models.
Yeah, Blackout looks like it's in the future. It seems interesting.
It's a near future sci-fi game. The thing that really struck me as super interesting when I walked up and they sort of gave me like a little elevator pitch is that all the mechanics are designed by combat vets, and they are trying to make the combat feel extremely realistic. And as soon as they said that to me, I was like, okay, you have... I'm intrigued. Like, tell me more about it.
There's another game that made that brag called Mercs. I didn't think Mercs was amazing. I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was interesting, though. I often think about how in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, more so earlier, a lot of traditional hex and shit war games were designed by people who had fought in large conflict. That kind of informed their experience. And that's also why a lot of them are super crunchy and hard to play.
Yes. So I was going to say, like, you can obviously imagine a scenario where wanting to make it a simulation goes way too far and it's not fun. It seems like they understood that when they were designing this and they wanted it to feel realistic. I think the goal, they actually said this explicitly, is they wanted you to play it like it was a real tactical engagement. Sometimes in the games that we play, because it's an abstraction and it's a simulation, you do things that don't really make sense if you were in that real scenario, even for the rules of that universe, right? You might run out and run up to somebody that has a weapon that you're like, no one would ever run at this person, they'd just kill you immediately.
I've had somebody run up and try and shoot Misaki in the face, even though she has a pole arm, and it is what it is.
It's the reason I could never get my dad to go play paintball. He's nobody, like, you playing paintball, nobody would get from behind the tree if these were real guns. It's like, they wanted it to feel like you were making real tactical decisions, you were making maneuvers the way that a squad of, like, hile-level military operators would do it if they were in certain circumstances. Now, I think right there, this will not appeal to a lot of people, but I also think there's another group of people who this will really appeal to. It was really interesting because it seemed like it's extremely lethal, which is something that I feel like games have moved away from a lot, where things are a little bit more forgiving and you can take a bunch of hits and you'll absorb the damage and you have an opportunity to do something about it before you lose your model and stuff like that. This is, everybody's got 1 health and you have armor, but you're doing rolls where the game mechanics are giving you extra dice or fewer dice depending on things like cover or special abilities on your weapons, or if you have elevation over your target, things like that. And you're doing opposed rolls in most cases because the opponent can actually react to what you're doing, similar to Infinity, but it's a little bit faster because it's not like you're reacting at any point along their movement. You're reacting at their final position. You can call that a pro or a con. It's a lot easier to do functionally. It may not be as satisfying because it's harder to take advantage of certain things, and it's easier to stay in cover because it's only the endpoint that you're worried about. But again, the pro and a con, your preference may vary. But then when you do have an opposed roll, if whoever rolls more successes, it puts through a point of damage, and if you fail your save, you just die. And that's it. And,
Wow.
We played, and, like, I thought I was being pretty tactical. I was moving up along some cover. I poked my head out. I went to shoot at him. I think I had one more die than him because I had some sort of advantage, and he rolled 2 successes and I rolled 1. And I was like, okay, well, I think I needed a 5 up on a D8 to pass my save, and I didn't, and I died. And I was like, well, I guess, it's not always just about positioning. He's just a better shot than me.
I like that. I have been thinking a lot about the way some games have a strong thesis, and one of them in certain games is that, like, combat in modern times is unfair and arbitrary. Maybe that does sound like what they're trying to go for. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because there's that on one hand where obviously the dice are going to betray you sometimes, but the focus is really on making those important tactical decisions, and it's not always going to mean that everything goes according to plan, which we're not playing chess. It's not all predetermined. But they have a heavy focus on the tactics, the careful maneuvering. There was one interesting thing that I saw, which was that if you peek up out of cover, instead of towing out and exposing part of your base so that you can see like you might do in Infinity, you can do a thing where, I don't remember what they called it, but basically you put like a little holographic template in front of your base, and that actually, the idea is that you're like holding the gun up around cover and looking around. And what it does is it extends your line of sight further, but it keeps you in cover because you're kind of poking out and poking back in. So it sort of represents this peeking around a wall, and you're staying in cover so you can try to expose a target or see down over cover while keeping yourself protected, which is something that I find interesting because I think one of the things that a lot of games don't account for a lot is this sort of dynamism of combat where you're just standing static in one place and everybody can shoot you. And this is showing, well, actually you're behind the wall, but you can see out because you're going to poke out, you're going to take a couple of shots, you're going to jump back behind cover. So I thought that was really interesting.
This all sounds cool, but I am almost worried that it becomes too simulation. Do you feel that way?
It didn't feel so bad. I mean, I do think that because of some strange rolls, some weird things happen in the demo that I got that maybe you wouldn't normally expect, some kind of unlucky dice rolls, but it didn't feel too simulation-y. It was a pretty fast-playing game,
Gotcha.
So it's not like you were sitting there like consulting charts and tables and stuff. It didn't really get bogged down in a lot of that stuff. I don't know. I would have to spend more time with it. I think that's a valid concern for sure. They did mention that there's some special rules that we hadn't been using. There are mechs in it, which is why the Titanfall thing is.
They look pretty cool also, I can't deny.
They're cool mechs. They're Titanfall style, a little bit grittier, which is cool. I really like the aesthetic. It's near future, and there's a lot of like politics in it where one of the factions is the UN, one of the factions is not Russians. That's what they called them, not Russians. That's not their real name, but everybody there just called them the not Russian. You can play South African mercenaries, which I thought was an interesting thing because it's something that you don't really see. They compared it to like District 9. They have robots that kind of look like District 9 robots.
Yeah, well,
pretty cool. Yeah, they knew who they were targeting with that. It seemed cool. The tables were really interesting looking. It's definitely something that I would like to check out more. It's another game that like you don't need a lot of models to play. It's like an 8-ish model count per side, which is really cool because you don't need to paint up 100 models or buy 100 models to try it if you wanted to get into it. And they're already planning expanding. They're going to have a new faction coming, and they're also implementing rules for vehicles, so like little buggies and stuff like that. So interesting stuff.
Something really funny about imagining the models are pretty sick looking, by the way. That is part of the reason I was like, I gotta check it out. The models look cool. It is funny imagining these elite mercenaries and they're just like in a car after playing so many war games with APCs, tanks, and mechs, and there's 3 guys in like a Jeep. or like a Chrysler, but I don't know. That's fun. I look forward. This is a game that I'm looking forward to. I'm glad that you got a demo in. I'm gonna have to do some research on it. The rules are free, which is always a plus. By the way, if you're the type of person who wants to hear the lore on this game, please leave me a comment because I've got a lot of interesting writing to work with. BattleTech has been around longer than I have. It's a unique beast. There's no seasonal rules. There's no yearly edition updates. I don't think there's even errata. There might be. There's not a standard for how you play. Some local groups will play Alpha Strike, which is this big-scale war game where you play with a bunch of guys, and it's supposed to be faster. Other people do classic BattleTech with its fun, fiddly simulation rules and hexagonal bases. It's an old-school war game with a capital W, because it's got hexes. Like, you might as well have a bunch of hexes and shits, just like our forefathers. And yet, somehow, even though it's this old-school war game with hexes and stuff, it is extremely popular. I don't know why it is. BattleTech gets new models all the time. Even if they're not always introducing new mech designs, people really like them, and they'll buy another Mad Cat Mark II. Again, BattleTech has a setting that was futuristic at the time, and is now charmingly retro-futuristic. Unlike the writers back in the 1980s, I am not that worried about Japan's economic dominance. I've played some of the video games, but I don't know that much about it, so I thought I'd bring my friend, my buddy Connor, a voice actor and BattleTech lore master extraordinaire, to tell me everything he could about BattleTech.
Yeah, so BattleTech's pretty cool, I guess.
And that's all the time I have, because I really, really want to talk all about Zeo Genesis. Okay, I am so in the pocket for this game. I'm biased because I'm a playtester, but you can trust me because I am deeply ashamed of anything that I think is even remotely dumb. Zeo Genesis is a skirmish-level war game that scales up. Like almost all the other games on this list, it's about guys and mechs who are fighting it out. It is not miniatures agnostic. Although the game is not out yet, the plan is to fund it on GameFound to produce hard polystyrene plastic kits of infantry and big robots. Before you click away, let me assure you that this game has the juice. First juicy thing, I like the setting a lot. Vibes are critical in any hobby. Bad vibes keep you away. Good vibes are practically the apex goal of a hobby. To soak and float and enjoy the thing that you're engaged with. Zeo Genesis has a unique blend of soft science fiction and retro anime from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but also kind of its own thing going. It's not going all in on the nostalgia, even though the look and feel take elements. I see DNA from stuff like Pat Labor and Vodums, but it is not just an excuse to do that thing again. For instance, the concept art is by Dan Morrison, a prolific artist with a style I like because, yes, it has that retro energy, but it's wholly identifiable and unique. I see Dan Morrison art and mech designs and I'm like, huh, I haven't seen that before. Maybe you know him from his Pictures of Warhammer stuff. Maybe you know him from games like Lancer, which is a RPG, so I won't be talking about it today, but I think Lancer rules. The setting is written by Gav Thorpe. If that name is familiar, it's because he wrote much of what we now know as Warhammer 40,000. The rest of it was of course taken from Frank Herbert's Dune. It sort of reminds me of getting George R.R. Martin to write stuff for Elden Ring, although Gav Thorpe is a little more hands-on with this project than old Georgie. I even had the chance to talk to Gav Thorpe at Adepticon about writing and publishing and setting stuff. So here we go.
I'm so excited about Zeo Genesis. I really am. You were telling me yesterday a little bit about like how you want to create a core and then have people expand their own stuff, right?
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about that? Like, where'd that idea come from, I guess?
So the whole point, I mean, for me, one of the benefits of like a tabletop game, as opposed to like a video game or whatever, it's interactive. So you can choose how to paint stuff, how to put your models together. You can also, choose your colour schemes. You can change the rules if you want to.
We were discussing this like Fortnite, right? Yeah. Fortnite lets people will make their own thing with your toys. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So do the same thing. There's sort of guidance for colour schemes if people want to follow that.
Right.
But there should also be room for people to do their own stuff.
Right.
So, and because the more narrative from the centre that you have, the harder that becomes.
Right.
So, because we're launching a very specific narrative that we're following this idea of a place called Sabre Ridge, it's kind of like this powder keg to go off.
It's just hardcore and pack, right?
Yeah, exactly. So at the start, that's it. So we're going to be following that story, and through the releases, that story expands. But of course, there's another 98 star system, basically, that we haven't even talked about, which we'll obviously show a little bit about and tell people a bit about. Some of those are other kind of like out there peripheral systems. Some of them are core systems with like, there's, arcologies and stuff like that. But again, people could not worry about the Saber Ridge stuff. So actually, my guard corps is security force who are protecting like this mining base, all these core systems. So we're going to be actually like a direct action cell who are attacking corporate headquarters here or whatever. So that's what I mean by creating your own stuff. Is like you can do that. And actually, in a few years' time, as we do more releases, we might decide to focus on one of those. There might be some variant Stormers stuff. Again, one of the things we're looking to do is offer variant like helmets, pads, that kind of stuff on STLs for people.
Love that.
So, if people want to print them at home and use a print service.
Last quick question then, because I know you're busy. Do you have your own home? Do you have a guard corps that you've made for you? Do you have a group of guys for guard corps or pack or something that are just for you?
I've been getting various production prints through. I've painted more of the pack stuff than that. I did a couple of the Stormers for the demos we were doing last year, and they're really nice. But actually, I'm more of a pack vibe, probably. I guess a little bit more out there.
A bit more of a rebel.
Yeah, and some slightly crazy colour schemes and stuff.
I've got to do the demo, so I cannot wait. Thank you so much for all your time, and I'm so excited for the game. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
So I like the setting, I like the vibes. Here's the other part. The rules had me swearing. A bunch. Heck, I said. These robots are really fast. Gosh darn, my opponent would say. Look at him go. By Methuselah's beard. This has the feeling of a... Units are either Zeos, as in the big piloted robots, or supports, as in the small guys that support the Zeos. Seeking to avoid issues like early War Machine, the game truly is about the fantasy of the big man. It's less about his smaller friends. If this game was all about the little guys, it wouldn't be called Zeo Genesis, it would be called Guys Genesis. And that would be cool, and it would be a different game. And this game is a little different from the others, because it's made by a somewhat famous designer. That's Andy Chambers. Andy is another G-Dubs alum, and much like Gav, people say he's responsible for, quote, some good stuff. Lots of Warhammer games, lots of those smaller Warhammer specialist games that people like so much, but also Blood Red Skies, Drop Fleet Commander, and many, many more. I actually have played a number of these, and I like them a lot. Also, he was apparently the lead writer on StarCraft II, Wings of Liberty. Just learned that. How about that? Like Gav, he's a known element in certain circles of nerd culture. There are elements of his design style that I love, and others that I do not. But what I do love is good, because every rule is thematic, and they all contribute to this feeling of the game in progress. It's not simply enough to label rules with fitting words. For example, if you were to play chess and just call the pawns mortgage brokers and the rooks zombie mortgages, it would not feel like an economic competition. Andy's design makes the mechs feel really fast, really powerful. They're jumping over stuff, they're leaping over stuff, they're charging, they're shooting these big guns. It's very fluid. It's got some Armored Core-ish vibe to me. To me, at least, they feel like a Japanese-style mech, where instead of a tank, they're a fighter jet. What I love here is voluminous. Zeos activate, and they take a bunch of actions. The objective system is also pretty neat. You're racing to reach a predetermined score limit. You can get points by killing the enemy, but also by accomplishing the mission, and you're trying to tick up until you reach it. It's an elegant way to do it, and I love tabletop games where you're racing to reach a certain score. Overall, I think it's great. Defective Dice and I obviously had the chance to discuss the game, but I kinda said a lot of the stuff that I repeated here, so, Zeo Genesis is not out yet. There are playtest materials available, and pre-built lists, so yes, you absolutely could play it right now. You can expect more from me on this game, I promise. And you can also check it out on GameFound as we speak. There we go. That's a bunch of mech games that you can play right now. Comments on the ones that you think are most interesting, and if there are any that you find less your style, because I would like to hear what you think. And I will return with more content soon. Take care.